Well, welcome all three of you. Thank you very much indeed for attending. Can I welcome Liz? Can I ask each of you just to introduce yourselves very quickly? You'll be familiar with the way in which select committees work. Each member in turn will ask questions. Don't feel you all have to answer everything. Some questions will be directed at one or other of you. But obviously we've got quite a lot to get through, and there are votes at 6, so we're hoping to conclude it just before that. But very much appreciate you coming. So perhaps start with you, Fraser.
Certainly. Fraser Cropper, I'm the chairman of the Independent British Vape Trade Association. We represent approximately 300 UK independent businesses and approximately 50% of the UK SME community who sell vape products in the UK.
Great.
My name is John Dunne. I'm a director of the UK Vaping Industry Association. We represent the independent vaping sector alongside vaping brands of the tobacco industry and also the pharmaceutical industry.
Thank you very much.
And my name's Sarah Jakes. I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees of the UK registered charity New Nicotine Alliance. And our aim is to reduce the harms of smoking by improving understanding of reduced risk products.
Thank you very much indeed. So I will begin, but can I ask each of you what your three organisations' position is, what your main message is with regard to e-cigarettes, perhaps starting with...
Certainly. Well, as I mentioned in my introduction, we represent the independent sector.
Yeah.
And that is those businesses which are free of any influence and control of tobacco. We think that's a vital discrimination between ourselves and other bodies who represent a combined aim. It's a very important distinction because it allows us to be able to drive a strategy which is clear and distinct. Our businesses were founded to deliver products to smokers who wanted an alternative to tobacco. And we think the conflation of tobacco interests and vaping interests doesn't allow for a coherent strategy. So that's probably our guiding principle, to deliver the support to our members in the conventional way that trade associations would, but also to help deliver that strategic message in the environment in which those businesses can justifiably flourish.
Thank you very much indeed. John?
I think from our perspective we represent the whole industry. We are a fully inclusive organisation, so therefore we look for membership outside of the independent vape sector, so tobacco companies with their vaping brands, but also the pharmaceutical industry through Blend and Bottle, one of our members. We really want to push the fact that we represent the entire industry, because if you look at the tobacco-owned brands, they represent about 25% of the industry. So therefore, if we were to speak on the industry's behalf, we feel that we have to be fully inclusive of those.
Okay, thank you very much.
So our position on e-cigarettes is that we feel that they're now proven to be a safer alternative to smoking, which a great number of people find an attractive and acceptable substitute. And they've certainly contributed to the record drops in smoking prevalence that we've seen in the UK. Unfortunately, over the years, we've seen public health ministers, from Edwina Currie, who pushed the ban on snus, and Anna Soubry, who unfortunately agreed to include e-cigarettes in the TPD. And we've seen mistakes made when it comes to the role of harm reduction in tobacco policy. So a couple of years ago, there was an attempt to strangle vaping at birth by pushing for a de facto ban on e-cigarettes in the EU. And we felt that this was a mistake. And that was rectified only by a massive campaign of grassroots consumers and the early entrepreneurs in the e-cigarette industry. And I think it's to the credit of those people now that there's about 1.5 million ex-smoking vapers in the UK and another 750,000 people who've given up both. But this happened not because of any action on the part of the Department of Health, but in spite of them. So what we'd like to see now is that the regulatory dog's dinner that we seem to have now, which I have to say blights the lives of about 3 million vapers in the UK and also harms those smokers who might otherwise decide to switch to the safer products. What we'd like to see now is leadership and not complacency. This country can do better in terms of harm reduction. and Brexit probably is the perfect opportunity to do so. So what I'd like to see is us working together to put right the wrongs that have been done so far.
Thank you very much. Could I just ask both Fraser and John, I mean, you've described how you represent different, overlapping but different groups. Is your message as bodies any different to the outside world, or are you effectively saying the same thing?
You want to start on that?
Well, I think in general you'll find that both the representation of John and I will be of our organisation's advocacy of vaping clearly. A very distinct clarity on what vaping is compared to smoking and the benefits that it will bring. There'll be entire consistency in that, I'm sure, with John and myself. I think it's about the nuance and the subtlety of what it means to be a trade association, actually.
Okay, and you've described your distinction on that already, so I understand that. Do you want anything you want to add to that?
No, I think I would agree with Fraser on that. The fundamental basics of what we're looking at are roughly the same.
Thank you. So, Fraser, could I just ask, your organisation state that a lack of regulation of e-cigarettes through its own dedicated vape-specific regulation,
yes,
as you describe it, and I think that was probably what you, Sarah Jakes, were also alluding to, is bad for consumers, industry and public health. That's, in essence, your evidence. Would you like to just elaborate on that briefly? I mean, it comes within the Tobacco Product Directive. What are you arguing for?
Well, we're arguing for, firstly, a directive and a mandate which comes from a sound risk assessment. The TPD wasn't formed out of a suitable risk assessment. It was cast, essentially, in 2012. And so much has happened, so much has changed since then. I think we need to remind ourselves as to what we're trying to protect against with the regulation. Start with a risk-based assessment first. And the conclusion will likely be, if we do that, that a whole range of things which seem to be arbitrarily set in the TPD will be adjusted. Things such as marketing and advertising. The restriction on that doesn't make any sense at all.
And we'll come on to that a little bit.
And some of the arbitrary constraints on product, the size of tanks, the volumes of fluid and the strength of fluid to be sold. Those are the key markers in where we think the regulation is incorrect and inappropriate at the moment.
But in terms of the context of the UK leaving the EU, is it your case that in future there should be a separate set of regulations for vaping?
Oh, very much so.
As against
yes,
tobacco?
I think part of the challenge we have is that we started off from a position where tobacco and vaping were consumed into the same mandate. It needs to be separated. Vaping needs to have a vape-specific regulation set.
Yeah. Any additional comments from other members of the panel?
No, I'd agree. I think it needs to be a fully evidence-based regulation framework that we look at. But I think the industry itself needs to be more engaged in that process, which it wasn't beforehand.
Okay. Well, look, what changes, therefore, do you think should be made to the product restrictions on e-cigarettes, the cartridge size, the nicotine levels, and so on? And indeed any rules on packaging and what can be stated on that packaging. Who wants to start us off on that?
Oh, I could start it off.
Sarah?
Particularly the arbitrary restrictions, the 2 millilitre tank limit and the 10 millilitre bottle limit. There is no scientific basis for those restrictions at all. And speaking for consumers, they make things fiddlier, the bottles are easier to lose. It's just generally inconvenient, and there's no possible gain from it. The 20 milligram per millilitre concentration limit, I believe Ash did a survey last year and found that I think it was 9% or something of vapers use concentrations higher than that. However, that was a snapshot. So a much larger proportion of the vapers that we now have will have started on those higher concentrations, and those limits push those people out of the picture.
And is it your concern in particular with heavy smokers that they might be attracted to a higher limit than that?
Yes, I mean, there's no doubt that when people first switch from smoking to vaping, it takes a while for them to get used to the different techniques. And the higher nicotine strengths help keep those people engaged with the product. It helps them with their cravings until such time as they can perhaps start to reduce their nicotine concentrations. But my worry is it wouldn't just be those 9% of people who are affected, it's all those people who are coming in behind us who haven't yet started on their pathway to being cloud chasers, or whatever those, whatever you'd like to call those of us who use the low nicotine strengths now. Those are the people I'm concerned with. I think advertising is a problem. I think it's a ridiculous situation where we have to rely on PHE's budget to put the message across to people that vaping is safer than smoking.
I think primarily on advertising, we'll come back to that with
sure.
other questions.
Okay.
So.
I mean, I would say there is perhaps one part of the regulations which was useful from a consumer point of view, and that was the notifications and the emissions testing. We would agree that anything that people are going to inhale should have some regulation, so we would keep that.
It's the notification to the MHRA.
The notification to the MHRA, the ingredients listings, the emissions testing, those are helpful to consumers, but virtually everything else is unhelpful.
Thank you. Anything that either of you want to add? If you just agree with everything she's said, then that's fine.
I think one of the other major factors that we're pushing against is the restrictions to advertising. As we've seen, the uptake has been slower in vaping since 2007 compared to 2018. And it's a ridiculous situation that Public Health England could come out and say vaping is 95% safer. However, as brands of our members, we cannot.
And we will come back on to more detailed questions about advertising a little later. Anything else you want to add?
I think those are the main key points.
Good. And finally from me, do you think that excise duties on e-cigarettes are appropriate?
No.
May I start?
Nope.
The answer succinctly is no. And why is the answer so succinct and so clearly no? I think there's been a real strong consensus in the 3 previous committee hearings where all those who've spoken, it's a wide cohort of stakeholders, have made it very clear it will be counterproductive. One of the things that we see through our businesses and our customers and consumers and smokers and vapers is that they see one of the clear dividends of giving up smoking, of course, is the health benefit, but there's a clear financial dividend to a lot of households. That's a real motivation and incentive. And if we really do share an agenda to have a smoke-free UK using vaping as one of the principal tools, we've got to keep those incentives for the individuals. And no more powerful an incentive for most people is that difference in the cost between the 2 products. I think to close that gap would be ill-conceived.
And the other 2 of you are in agreement with that, I take it.
The only thing I would add is that it's a syntax, and we know from tobacco regulation that those are designed and quite successful at disincentivising the use of a product. So I don't know why you would want to disincentivise the use of e-cigarettes for smokers.
Thank you very much indeed. Bill.
John, if I may, your association argues that the regulation around short fills is both illogical and worse still, you suggest it's potentially dangerous, which is quite concerning. What brought you to that conclusion? What the reason that you conclude that?
I think one of the things that's led to that happening is the fact that with the TPD, the bottle size has been restricted to 10 mLs, which has been proven extremely inefficient and cumbersome to vapors. With also the TPD not covering zero nicotine liquids, it's allowed liquids to be sold in much larger bottles. With the addition of a nicotine 10 ml being added to it in shake and vape format, which has kind of bypassed the whole purposes of the TPD. Now, the other area of concern with that is those liquids do not need to be tested, and we have found that many of them contain banned substances, which is an extremely concerning thing.
So this is where the danger lies?
Sure, correct.
Where would they source a banned substance?
The liquids themselves are readily available in 100 millilitre, 200 millilitre bottles now, and there's nothing that in the current regulations that covers zero nicotine liquid. The 10 ml bottles that they use to add to those liquids are covered by the TPD and are sold in the proper 10 ml format.
Are they being sold by your members?
Some of our members do sell the
including some of these
liquids.
Legal products? The substance, including some of the ingredients that you say are dangerous.
Our members have had their liquids tested, and we didn't find any substances in liquids contained by our members. However, we did find it in liquids that don't come from our members.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm just picking up, sorry for leaving this point. Are you suggesting that the vapour, the equipment for vaping could be used to inhale or take unsafe substances? Is that where the danger lies?
If you look at the TPT regulations, there are ingredients that we're not allowed to use in those liquids. So part of the TPD process is that we have to test and submit those findings with our registration. There is no such process for zero nicotine liquid, and the MHR have no mandate to do any testing. So one of the things that we're looking at as an organisation is to do a voluntary registration of our products, very similar to those that are done for the TPD products, but again, that's a voluntary scheme.
Right. Just taking to address that issue of the illogical aspect and the danger aspect, was your suggestion is a voluntary code of conduct. Would it stop at that, or do you see anything else that would be?
I don't think it will, because there's no teeth in the current regulations to make people outside of our organisation do it. I think if the size restrictions had been lifted on regular product, there would be no need for a short fill product in the marketplace.
So I see a nod of approval. Fraser?
Well, in part there's a nod of approval. There's a point of just clarification, I believe, and John alluded to that in his last comment, which is shortfall came about because of the restrictions placed on fluid volumes by the TPD. It didn't exist before May of 2017. It existed because there was a demand from the consumer for better value products. By putting 50 millilitres into 5 separate bottles, increases the price, reduces the value, of course. So the industry responded to that by providing concentrate and nicotine in individual packages. The vast majority of short fill products can be and indeed are safe and consistent with the TPD regulations. It may be that there are a small minority of those products which are on open sale which are not conforming to the mandate of the TPD. It's beholden on MPs, of course, if you want to change the regulation to do that. We wouldn't be advocating necessarily that there is a problem with short fill. There's a problem that short fill doesn't fall into some kind of regulatory.
But do you think the innovation of introducing the short fill approach, which has come about as a result of the regulation,
yes,
if you change the regulation,
it will go away?
It would just go away.
Indeed, because we had the environment had been established for 6 or 7 years before 2017. People were mixing their own e-liquids and had been merrily for many years. The average fluid volume sold in 2016 would have been probably a bottle of 30 millilitres. That was the average size that a vapor would have used. They turned to short fill because of the restrictions that the TPD placed. By changing that limit, I think you automatically alleviate most of those commercial tensions, and consumers will be happy to buy those products which are formed in the correct volumes, fully tested and fully compliant.
Yep. Moving slightly on, it's suggested or claimed that the e-cigarette flavourings are what appeals to the smokers to migrate from conventional smoking to vaping. It's suggested or claimed to that. Is there any evidence to support that suggestion or claim that it's the flavouring that causes the migration from conventional to vaping? What's the attraction? What's the appeal?
Is it for me?
Does it cost?
There have been cross-sectional surveys on flavours and flavour preferences. The impression that we get from those is that when people first switch, they're looking for something as similar as they can get to their tobacco cigarettes. So a lot of people will switch to tobacco flavours, but then they tend to migrate away. And from what we hear from feedback from people who contact us, is that distances them from their previous tobacco habit, so that then they become averse to the flavour. I mean, obviously this isn't everyone, but many people then become averse to the flavour of tobacco, and they're quite happy vaping mango for the rest of their days, if possible. But it's definitely, I would say, its flavours are probably more important in keeping people from relapsing than in helping people to switch in the first place.
Right. But that's anecdotal, and it's an
It's
impression.
kind of, it's anecdotal with a mix of cross-sectional surveys.
But no, well, there's been some surveys.
Yes,
There's been cross-sectional surveys, yeah.
If I may,
Yeah, certainly.
there's a very well-published academic called Dr. Fossinos, who's published a survey on flavours in vaping, and he concludes for me. He states that the research found that the majority of vapers would find vaping less enjoyable or boring if the flavours were restricted, and 48.5% of vapers stated it would increase their cravings for tobacco cigarettes, and 39.7% said that without flavours it would be less likely for them to reduce or quit smoking. So that's a piece of academic research. I think anecdotally there is another lump of evidence, which is most businesses who sell vaping products know through their sales history what they sell. The majority of flavours that our members sell are principally non-tobacco flavours. I don't think there's been any marketing to that effect. It's simply a natural cause of offering flavours to the customer base, and the customers eventually choosing and deciding which ones they prefer.
So flavour availability and choice is a good way.
Actually.
It's a good way of migrating people from
Well, it's one of those very important variables. Vaping offers a lot more variables than smoking does, from the power of the device, the look of the device, the strength and the flavour. Flavour is actually probably the key discriminator, a really important one that customers choose. And I think once you've smoked and you've moved to vaping, you recognise just what an unsavoury habit it was actually. It's not a nice thing to do to inhale tobacco. Even when you take the smoke out of a tobacco flavour, the tobacco flavour is not as appealing as a sweet flavour or a fruit flavour.
You're making me feel guilty, Fraser, a smoker for 30 years, but I'm a convert.
Well,
Thank you very much.
I was 20 years guilty myself as well.
Thanks are guilty. Yeah. That's me, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen.
Thank you. Mr. Cooper, if I may come to you, sorry, Fraser. It's about the potential for medically licensing products. Now, I think in your submission to this, you stated that medically licensed e-cigarettes being prescribed by GPs would be a bad idea. Why is that?
A bad idea. We are not aware of what's actually wrong at the moment. There's 3 million vapers who have found their own way out of smoking through vaping, and that's done within a background where there's lots of misinformation and potential lack of clarity as to what vaping is. So that's a remarkable thing. I think the UK should be really proud of that, actually. It's an example to the wider community. But on this particular point, what we do understand from our experience of what a vapor's journey out of smoking is, it's vital that they take some responsibility. It's vital that they also have the ability to tune their vaping journey by using all the variables that they have at hand. The reason why I made those statements are that we believe that would be hugely disempowering if you gave the responsibility to a GP, to a prescribed product, that the vapor wouldn't have the same engagement, the same empowerment, and it would also potentially limit the range of products. There's many vapors who say that my first engagement in vaping wasn't successful. I went back to smoking, and I came into vaping again, and I eventually found the right product. The risk is that those unitary devices, those 2 or 3 that may well be dysregulated, may not meet the widest cohort of needs. What we would suggest, because it's been exemplified in recent work as well, is the work that can be done with the experts, which is Stop Smoking Services, partnering with independent vaping stores and independent vaping businesses. That's where the true synergy lies, actually, taking their expertise when they need to, supported by vaping businesses.
Okay. So where you, I think I quote, a smoker being homeless or in receipt of benefit might be an exception.
Well, not an exception to prescription. We mentioned that in the context of potential free products that come through the Stop Smoking Services rather than them being prescribed medicinal products.
Do you mean just to overcome the upfront cost?
A big one.
To overcome the upfront
yes,
cost?
Yes, that's all it is, yes. It's that simple. It's not that would therefore suggest that medicinal regulation is the answer to that particular cohort.
So smoking cessation services are able to provide things at no cost, even though they are not medically licensed.
Indeed. And that's happened. There's been many cases where various self-smoking services have partnered with vaping businesses and provided those products.
So you're saying that that's a better route?
Well, it continues to provide that large range of products, the variability and the ability to fine-tune each individual vapor's needs to a product.
Do you think the cost of starting that journey from smoking tobacco to vaping is a barrier?
For most people, no, because the cost is generally less than 3 days of a smoker's cost. So for most people, it is a very small barrier, if a barrier at all. But for some people, it will be, of course. £30 may be very significant to some people.
Okay. But is there any evidence of people not choosing the vaping route because of the cost?
There may be. I'm not aware of any.
Okay, fine, thank you. I mean, do the rest of the panel have any comment on
I think one thing that I would like to point out is that most smokers don't see themselves as being sick. This is not a disease, it's an addiction to a substance. They also like the fact that this is a consumer-driven innovation. It's not, it doesn't feel like a medicine. And I think pushing it down that route would have a detrimental effect. I think the other thing you need to look at also is the current structure under which a product has to go through. You're looking at roughly about £10 million worth of an investment to get it through. You're looking about 3 years, a 3-year process. And then you have to look at the cost of the infrastructure that you have to put in place for manufacturing, etc. on top of that. When you've got an industry that's innovating at the speed that ours does, a 3-year process like that just doesn't work.
No. And
just ask a little follow-up, though. I mean, I think the question is, for people who can't afford it, that it might help those people to give up. And, you know, it's like nicotine gum. You can get your nicotine gum on prescription, or you can just go into the shop and buy it. It doesn't have to be one or the other. But, you know, they're 14 quid a packet. So if you haven't got much money, you want to go in and if you can get it on prescription, that'll be good. And some people quite like the gum and the taste. So would you not think, for some people who find it expensive, that could be an additional good thing? It wouldn't stop you innovating. I don't see why it would stop you innovating. It wouldn't stop people going in to pay for it. It would just help people on lower incomes to quit.
I think, as Fraser pointed out earlier on, that's already happening at the moment without having to go through a medical regulatory process. That, in fact, really the only people that could afford to do that are going to be tobacco companies and pharmaceutical companies. This industry has grown at a rapid pace without having to have that in place.
So you're saying through smoking cessation services entering arrangements to provide the upfront...
I mean, I understand the question, and it makes entire sense that anybody should be able to escape smoking.
Yeah.
And if vaping is one of those tools, then we have to find the best way for every single person. If one of those encumbrances and limitations is finance, then we've got to get over that hurdle as well. Is the answer prescription? Is the answer medicinally licensed products? It could be that we find a different way, that we are able to give the medical practitioners the ability to source products, open market products, which facilitate that. The danger, and this is not some kind of protectionist position, but the danger is there becomes some kind of hierarchy, that people will perceive that prescribed e-cigarettes are better by dint of the fact that they've been through apparently this more challenging and more demanding process. That could have a detrimental effect, because what we do know, and this is, I think, categorical, is that the range of vaping devices and all these variables are key to its success. You can't put all those into a set of prescribed products. It'd be too demanding. Could you have a product or a set of products that could be provided by medical practitioners? Of course you could. Of course you could.
And that might help get over the perception that vaping isn't 95% safer than...
Yes. And we recognise also some of the paradigms of which the medical practitioners work in. They're used to prescribing medicines which have been through a formal process. They may well understand the value of vaping, but they're reluctant to send vapers to vaping stores, understandably, because they don't know what the service they're going to get, they don't know whether the product's going to work, and they've got ownership over that patient and responsibility. So maybe we have to answer that question, which is how do we connect the medical practitioners and those who want to deliver smoking cessation services to the right products?
So as the organisations representing the vast majority of suppliers and traders, what activity have you undertaken to engage with health professionals so that they do understand where the reality and where the myth
I think there's been a number of really good and strong examples where certain stop smoking services have proactively gone and saw vaping businesses because they knew the potential. They were constrained by protocols within their organisation. They've unilaterally gone out and found vaping businesses to acquire products and knowledge. Leicestershire would be a good example. A recent study undertaken in Salford, Greater Manchester, which was one of our member partnered with that organisation, offered them vaping products. They then delivered them to over 1,000 homeless people, and the results have been tremendous, greater than they expected.
It's ad hoc at the moment.
It is at the moment. There's no central policy. It's down to individual healthcare groups.
Stephen.
Sorry, that was my
Sorry.
follow-up question. It's a bit scattergun, and I was going to suggest that perhaps as the industry matures, that you could try and make this a more systematic approach to make sure that you're not reliant on... I mean, we've heard evidence here from other organisations where, particularly mental health institutions, where some are embracing this openly and others have banned it completely. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not consistent, and what I suppose we're all trying to do is achieve a consistent message and a consistent delivery across the whole country, and that, obviously industry has a part to play in that.
And we are moving along that spectrum. Actually, it was only in this October, the Stoptober campaign, where PHE formally and explicitly partnered with the IBGA, and they were informing people of the stores to go to and the products they should use. That's the first staging post in a more coherent approach between the public health providers, those who are responsible for smoking cessation, and the businesses that provide the products. We can do more, we should do more, we need to do more actually.
Can I
yes, sorry.
Sarah. Can I just wanted to come back on something that Liz was alluding to. I do think there is a danger of kind of overgeneralising, and I would completely agree with what Fraser's just said about most people. I do think there is some people who would derive confidence from a medicinally licensed product. I think there's also situations where a medicinally licensed product could be helpful, and that would be in particular in secure environments like prisons and mental health units. My biggest worry about the existence of a medicinally regulated product would be local commissioners becoming lazy about then only recommending those. So we had a huge success story in Leicester where Louise Ross was spearheading e-cig friendly stop smoking services, and my worry would be that as soon as there is a medicinally regulated product, that commissioners will then say to services, well, you can only recommend these, and all those pretty shiny things.
You fear as a law of unintended consequences?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. That's something you would have to watch out for.
You finished. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to do a follow-up on this. Look, your job is to represent all your different members, and you obviously don't want one lot, understandably, this is your job, to be getting, if they were medically prescribed, NHS starts to use it, they build a market, some of your other members feel fed up. I understand your position you're in, but there is a public policy question about, for someone like me, who believes we should be using vaping a lot more because it is so much safer, and we need to get rid of some of the myths about it, that for disadvantaged groups, low-income people in prison and mental health institutions, we want to get something going here. And so I think there is a balance between a public policy objective of getting that help to the people who need it, which is different from yours. And my own sense is, and I wonder whether you would comment on it, that once you found a vape or different vapes you like, and if you have the money to go and buy it, you'll carry on doing that. It's not those people, it's the people who aren't using it, who we need to give the NHS a kick to make sure that that's available. And that might be something you should think about.
Can I ask for tight answers, because we're tight on time?
No, I agree with everything you said. The only aspect that I suggest there's a little detail to be added is, yes, of course we represent our vendors and our manufacturers. The challenge we have with prescription is not that it will take business away, that it will actually stem the influence of vaping. That what we should be doing is recognising the public health agenda as a shared agenda. We as an industry body would love for there to be clarity coming from the NHS. We would love for that messaging to be clear and unequivocal about the benefits. And if that meant that certain products had to be prescribed to deliver that clarity of message, we will be full square behind it. Because the benefits are not just in that first engagement. Anybody who understands vaping, who gets benefit from it, will start to find their own solution. They will eventually. We've got to get people into it initially. We've got to get their messaging clear, which is a push for all those people who have involvement and responsibility. The messaging is way more important than the product, actually.
Remember, thank you. Okay, can I bring in Carol now, unless there's absolutely a burning... Is that fine? Okay, fine. Carol, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. touched on advertising briefly, but I'd like to ask a little more about this. In your written evidence to committee, all three of your organisations stated that the current advertisement regulation around e-cigarettes is unhelpful. What is it you would like to see in that?
Can I start with that? So, at the moment, there is a huge problem with perception of relative risk of vaping and smoking, and the current regulations restrict advertisers from putting across with, messages which would be really useful in terms of good public health messaging, which is what I touched on earlier when I mentioned that PHE have been having to do it for them. So, to keep it fairly brief, what we would like to see is we would like to see generic statements on relative risk being allowed, so not attached to any particular product, but we would like to see advertisers being able to say, according to Public Health England, vaping is at least 95% safer than smoking, provided that's not attached to a specific product. And then additionally to that, if there is evidence that a particular product is 95% safer or however many percent safer, then clearly they should be allowed to say that as well. I think also it's unhelpful that banning has been, that advertising has been banned from practically everywhere, including all broadcast media. It would be really good to see vaping come into the public conscience, as it would if it was allowed in radio and TV advertising.
I think one of the concerns that we see is the fact that public health message is not getting out there in an efficient and effective manner. And in fact, more people now think vaping is just as bad, if not worse, than smoking than did 4 or 5 years ago. That's going the wrong way. I think it's, one of the things that we found, we just ran a vaping awareness month called Vapril through the UK VIA, without a single penny from the public purse being involved. And we had tremendous success from that. But it's things like that that the industry... Pardon?
How do you measure that success?
Well, we reckon that we were able to influence about 200,000 smokers. We ran smoking or vaping awareness seminars in many of our stores. So looking at the attendance figures from those, they were quite beneficial. We gave away free devices, which I think goes back to Liz's question earlier on, where the industry is giving back and trying to help that. But the key here is not to burden the NHS with further costs. As an industry, we're quite willing to do our bit to push that public health message. But to Sarah's point, it's ridiculous of the fact that we as brands cannot say the same thing as Public Health England to try and reinforce that positive message that the UK is really shining ahead of the rest of the world on.
Is there not a difficulty, however, that, I mean, we didn't know of the health problems of smoking tobacco cigarettes until many, many years down the line. Is there not a problem that we could be promoting health claims where there potentially could be a problem because we don't know of the effects yet?
So I think that's probably an answer to a question that's probably been answered previously by those who've represented the first session. We believe...
Well, I think particularly making health claims.
Well, I think it's a health claim only relative to a smoker's context. What vaping doesn't do is make anybody better per se. What it does is significantly reduce the risk of that which is a smoker that they're exposed to. So it's a relative health claim. It's not a health claim in the singular sense that it makes somebody better.
But your point is it's a claim that's made, or it's a statement that's made by Public Health England.
Well, indeed it is. If they're happy to stand behind it and they support it with data and academic research, as do Cancer Research UK and a whole range of very eminent organisations who've been very clear and clarion on what the value of vaping is and the dividend that can be reaped by supporting vaping's success in the UK.
So you're really saying, rather than making health claims, you're making a comparison?
Well, we would only ever make claims which have been substantiated by bodies such as those, and we would simply be reiterating in the context of our businesses that which has already gone before us. It wouldn't be us making unilateral health claims, that they'll be supported by the research that is supported by those bodies that share that same aim.
Okay, and finally, if I could ask ASA's consultation around possible changes to e-cigarette advertising doesn't extend to broadcast media. Is there a possibility, do you think that is a potential area for expansion post-Brexit?
I'll say yes. I think that all aspects of advertising should be looked at post-Brexit. I think what's confusing is there's an awful lot of grey area out there into what we can and cannot say. And I know the ASA was supposed to have that clarification out in April, but now we're looking at several months probably down the line before any new clarification comes out. So I think it's crucial, I think, to the success of convincing the other 7 million smokers out there to do something more healthy, that those advertising rules are cleaned up, and that post-Brexit we really take a look at reversing those to go back to what we were doing prior to that, which was working and growing the industry at a far greater rate.
And not wanting to be adversarial, what we have achieved is 3 million ex-smokers, or at least 1.5 million ex-smokers and 3 million vapers. The greatest weapon to confront tobacco is the vaping sector, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as our members are. We've been hugely successful to tie a hand behind our back and not allow us to be able to promote our products and to seize even more of those smokers out of the hands of tobacco businesses. I think that doesn't make sense. We're in a regulated space. We are protecting our consumers because they're a regulated space. It should have allowed also, therefore, for confidence that we can continue to do these products and these services in an ethical and responsible way.
Thank you very much indeed. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question is really to you, Sarah, about a statement that the Alliance made about the role that Public Health England has, and in particular about encouraging employers and transport operators, I think it was the centre of it, and managers of public spaces not to introduce bans on vaping. What is it that you want Public Health England to do?
I think before I answer that specifically, it's important to understand a little bit of the background as to why these bans are happening, and they are happening everywhere. Very often it's got to do with ignorance and prejudice, frankly. Prejudice against people who were smokers and who look like smokers. And it's not just on the part of the owners. Though a lot of these public space managers, owners, proprietors, whatever they are, they're relying on the opinions of their other customers or patrons or, whoever. And so where there's a general fear, prejudice, and just not liking it very much of vaping, they will tend to just blanket ban. So there's a problem with public perception. There's a problem with understanding the fact that second-hand vapour is actually harmless. There is no evidence at all of any harm to bystanders from vape. People don't understand that. Some businesses we've come across don't understand that vaping isn't actually covered in current smoke-free laws. They believe that it's banned legislatively. And I think.
So again, is it what you want from Public Health England is a clearer message, and what you want is the misconceptions that appear to prevail.
I think a clearer message, a more accessible message, and a louder message from Public Health England. I mean, they have produced a guide.
Yeah.
They did produce a guide. I've yet to come across anybody who actually knows about it before I tell them about it. But what Public Health England could do would be to promote good policy within private businesses and local authorities through education, and that would be education not only of the managers of these spaces but also public information, so that pubs and restaurants, well, maybe not restaurants, but so that these places are not getting pressure from other customers to bring in these policies.
Do you think there's a role for the I'm going to use the word occupiers in this sense, so that's the sort of transport companies and things. Do you think there's a role for them to create the environment, or to advocate how they can create an environment that's acceptable both to non-vapers, vapers?
I think that's what's missing from the conversation at the moment, is the effort to create an environment for both. Because there are people who don't want to be around vaping, and their wishes have to be considered as well. But also, there's ridiculous situations where for example, on an open platform at Billericay Station today, there's a loudspeaker going on, no smoking, this includes e-cigarettes. Now, this is a quarter of a mile long in the open-air platform with about 10 people on it. So it's down to, I think, laziness. I think one thing Public Health England could do, if they're not doing it already, is to engage with other influential organisations such as the TUC and ACAS and improve the advice that they're giving to the businesses that come to them. And something that I believe the industry has actually thought about doing, but perhaps Public Health England could think about doing as well, is to produce model policies so that it's easy for people to adopt. You know, they can take a model policy, adapt it to their needs, and they don't really have to think about it, because I think at the moment it's the not thinking about it that is causing the problem. You know, when you look at transport, there's no reason why you couldn't have one carriage on a train where vaping's allowed, considerate vaping's allowed.
If I move that on, I mean, we've heard today and in evidence about the fact that the vaping industry is very innovative. It's a constantly changing industry almost. I suppose the question is, where would you see the responsibility between the business itself and government? At the sort of, if we go above Public Health England, where should the responsibility lie?
I think it should always be the responsibility of the business to set policy in their business. I think that's an important principle, but I think they need help in setting sensible policies if we're to achieve what we want to achieve. Because let's face it, there is no point switching to vaping if you can't actually vape anywhere.
Right. That's a very good place to leave that.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
And that's my point. Is there any evidence, as more, and it does appear to me that more institutions, businesses, transport providers have banned vaping, they are forcing vapers to effectively go out and perform in exactly the same way as smokers.
Yeah.
So that then you go to the pub and you're associating again with smokers as opposed to distancing yourself from tobacco. Is there evidence that that undermines people's commitment to vaping and is forcing them back towards tobacco?
There is not published evidence that I know of. There is anecdotal evidence. I think once people are like me, I've been vaping for 5 years, I can stand in the middle of a crowd of smokers and I will not be tempted. But in the early days, I'll definitely that is a temptation.
So in the same way that flavours puts distance between you and your smoking past, location has a part to play as well.
It's about so many nuanced things. It's about the message that it sends to people when you send people out to do that. You know, you're sending them outside because they're obviously doing something dangerous and antisocial.
Yeah.
And a lot of this goes back to fostering intolerance. When you see things, when people are shoved outside, and this applies as much to tobacco control policies on smoking as it does to vaping, what you're doing is you're giving the public the right to look down on those people for their choices, and you're giving the public the right to shun them. And that's and the unfortunate thing is that is transferred onto vapers now.
Thank you.
Well, I think there's an opportunity. We talked about public health leading by example, but I know this subject has come up at the APPG in this very building, and I think there's an opportunity for government and for this House to show the way forward. There's 2 areas in this building, for instance, where you can vape. The members that came to the APPG, most of them didn't even know what those places were, and they've been here for many, many years.
Where are they?
I have no idea. But again, that discussion came up. It's pushing smokers or vapers into an area with smokers. It's like putting an alcoholic into a bar. It just does not make sense. But I think the government and this House have an opportunity to show the way forward.
Damien.
This is for the whole panel. Do you think there is a role for heat not burn as well as e-cigarettes in the spectrum of smoking cessation products?
As an association, we don't have a viewpoint on that because we're a vaping association.
What's your personal view?
We do have a view on heat not burn. We support heat not burn insofar as it's a harm-reduced product. To the specific of your question, whether it has a place in cessation, I think in practical terms it definitely does. I think as it goes more mainstream, people will stop smoking and start using heat not burn. There is bound to be a cohort of people who find heat not burn more attractive than vaping for whatever reason. Whether that will ever be a part of formal cessation, I kind of doubt that. I cannot see organisations like NICE and the BMA ever endorsing a tobacco product with informal cessation services.
So our position would be that clearly it's distinctively a tobacco product. The research suggests it's about 10 times more harmful than vaping products. And that we recognise that to some customers, some consumers, some smokers, it may be a viable stepping stone out of smoking. The challenge will be making sure that each individual smoker has the right cessation pathway, and putting heat not burn centrally as this principal product that a lot of the tobacco companies wish to sell it as, I think potentially doesn't escort the consumer to the place they need to go to, or as quickly as they could get there, and maybe they don't need to bypass through that product to get to a smoke-free future. So I think we've got to be very careful as to how it's positioned. It should not be conflated with vaping. It's fundamentally different. It should be subject to different regulation and different exercise criteria. And we would be, and we are concerned how the tobacco industry, particularly Philip Morris, are orientating their product as this Trojan horse to associate it too closely to vaping when it should be distinct and separate.
Okay. So what's your estimation of the relative harmfulness of both products, and should that dictate the duty that's levied on?
Categorically, it should determine the levy of duty, and it should also determine the regulations and where they sit within that spectrum of product set. Our independent assessment is that it's about 10 times as dangerous as vaping. Based on what? Based on we've done our own analysis, we've taken a number of those products and tested them in our laboratories and tested, and it comes to that figure when you look at the number of different toxic elements and the magnitude of those toxic elements. There's also a study being done by Dr. Foster, who correlates his takeaway summaries about 10 times as harmful as vaping. So there needs to be more independent research done, actually. We currently find ourselves in a situation where people are talking about heat not burn with summary statements as to what their risk profile is. There needs to be some significant independent research which once and for all categorically determines where they do sit, what their risk potential is, and therefore what the subsequent actions will need to be.
Good. Just before we finish, I just wanted to come back very briefly to the low-income point that Liz raised earlier. Am I right in understanding that your argument is that there could be two approaches? One is a medically licensed product that can be prescribed by GPs and others, or secondly, making more universally available the upfront product to avoid the cost of the initial investment, which then overcomes the barrier that people on low incomes face. Is that right, that either approach potentially addresses the problem of low income smokers being put off vaping by cost?
I think, in simple summary,